My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for as long as I can remember, my life has revolved around one thing: pleasing my mother, Diane. From the outside, people would tell you she's a pillar of Fairview, Illinois. She organizes church bake sales, chairs charity auctions, and has the kind of warm smile that makes strangers instantly trust her. If you asked anyone in town about Diane Mitchell, they'd probably describe her as a saintly widow who carried herself with grace after my father's death. But behind the closed doors of our red brick house on Willow Street, she was someone entirely different. To me, she was the woman who could spot a flaw faster than most people notice a compliment. "Lauren, straighten up. You look lazy when you slouch. Lauren, do you really need a second helping? Lauren, why can't you be more like Rachel?" That last one was her favorite. My sister Rachel was everything I wasn't, at least in my mother's eyes. Rachel had graduated top of her class, left Fairview behind at 18, and never looked back. She was a corporate lawyer in Chicago now, with a corner office, a husband who was just as ambitious, and 2 children who could already recite the alphabet in 3 languages. When she visited for holidays, my mother would practically glow, bragging to anyone within earshot about Rachel's achievements. And me? I stayed in Fairview. I worked at a local marketing agency, lived in a modest little house just 3 blocks from my mother's, and stopped by nearly every day to check on her. That wasn't because I lacked ambition, at least not in the beginning. I once dreamed of moving west, of designing campaigns for big companies in San Francisco or Los Angeles. But when Dad died suddenly of a heart attack during my junior year of high school, those dreams crumbled. My mother leaned heavily on me, and I convinced myself she needed me too much to ever leave. It was easier for Rachel to be the golden child when she was gone. She could swoop in at Christmas with expensive gifts and glowing stories about boardroom victories while I stayed behind to make sure Mom's gutters were cleaned, her prescriptions picked up, her lawn trimmed just the way she liked it. The town saw me as dutiful, and maybe I was. But what they didn't see were the small ways my mother chipped away at me every single day. When I was 16, I worked for weeks on a painting for the school art show. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Bright blues and yellows streaked across a canvas that I thought captured something hopeful. I carried it home like a treasure. She took one look and said, "Well, that will never hang in a gallery, will it?" I never painted again. Years later, after I landed a promotion at the agency, I drove straight to her house to share the news. I was officially the youngest creative director they'd ever had. Mom listened, nodded once, and said, "Well, it's not like you're running a real firm in Chicago, but I suppose it's something." That night, I sat in my car in her driveway, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to swallow down the disappointment I swore I'd stopped expecting. But despite it all, I kept trying. Some part of me still believed that if I worked hard enough, if I just became the version of myself she wanted, she might finally be proud of me. Fairview itself didn't make things easier. It was the kind of town where everyone knew your business, where reputation mattered more than reality. Our neighbors waved when they passed, always asking after my mother. "She's lucky to have you," they'd say, glancing at me with admiration. Lucky. The word stung every time. Inside, I knew the truth: Mom wasn't lucky. I was trapped. The worst part was how invisible I felt when Rachel came home. She'd sweep in with her sharp suits and perfect smile, and Mom's criticism would vanish like it had never existed. She'd gush over Rachel's latest win in court, laugh at her stories, and listen with rapt attention while I served coffee and cleared dishes in silence. I might as well have been the hired help. And yet, I stayed. I told myself Rachel had earned her escape, and mine would come later. But later kept slipping further away. By the time I was 28, I realized I'd spent more than a decade molding my life around my mother's needs. Every relationship I tried to start fizzled out, either because she disapproved of the man or because I was always too busy taking care of her to nurture anything of my own. It wasn't all bad, I told myself. I had a steady job, a roof over my head, and people who respected me, at least on the surface. But deep down, I knew I wasn't living my own life. I was living in service of hers. Looking back now, I can see the signs of what was coming. I can see how I was slowly unraveling, even if I didn't want to admit it. At the time, though, it just felt like another year, another round of holidays spent listening to Rachel shine, and another round of sighs and sharp remarks from my mother whenever I tried to share a piece of myself. I told myself this was normal. That this was just what it meant to be the good daughter. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change, and the person I'd been trying so hard to be was about to disappear for good. When my father died, it felt like someone had ripped the floor out from beneath us. I was 16, old enough to understand that he wasn't coming back, but too young to realize just how much of a buffer he had been between my mother and me. Dad was the gentle one. The kind of man who'd sneak into my room after a particularly sharp comment from Mom, set a mug of hot cocoa on my desk, and say, "Don't take it to heart, kiddo. She just wants the best for you." His words didn't erase the sting, but the way his eyes softened told me he understood more than he ever said aloud. When he was gone, the little shield I'd had disappeared with him. Mom's criticisms became louder, sharper, and more constant. "You're filling out too quickly, Lauren. No man wants a girl who can't control herself. You should be looking at universities closer to home. Who's going to take care of me if you run off to California?" It wasn't phrased like a command, but the message was clear. By the time I graduated high school, I'd convinced myself that staying in Fairview was my decision. I turned down a scholarship in California and enrolled at the state university 30 minutes away. I told everyone I wanted to save money and be practical. The truth was simpler: I couldn't imagine leaving Mom alone in that house. Rachel, on the other hand, had already escaped. She was 3 years older and had bolted to Chicago for law school the moment she could. Mom spun it as a sacrifice. "Rachel's so busy, she barely has time for family," but I could see the pride shining in her eyes whenever she listed off Rachel's accomplishments. Meanwhile, I lived in the shadow of what could have been. After graduation, I got a job at a local marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I worked hard, climbed the ladder, and after a few years became a creative director. Most people would have been proud of that. My mother wasn't. "Creative director in Fairview isn't the same as in Chicago," she said when I broke the news over dinner. "But I suppose it's something." I tried to shrug it off, but the words sank deep. It always felt like my achievements existed in a smaller font next to Rachel's bold headlines. I bought my own house a few blocks from Mom's place. It was a modest 2-bedroom, just big enough for me and the furniture I'd slowly collected. In theory, it gave me independence. In practice, it became an extension of her household. I'd rush home on lunch breaks to drop off groceries or drive her to appointments. If I dared to complain, she'd remind me of her fixed income and sigh dramatically, even though I knew Dad had left her a comfortable nest egg. Every season brought a new list of tasks. "Lauren, the gutters need cleaning." "Lauren, the garden is getting out of hand." "Lauren, can you pick up my prescriptions again? The doctor changed them." I told myself I didn't mind. That this was what good daughters did. But deep down, resentment was building, brick by brick. Relationships never stood a chance. When I was 25, I dated Mark, a kind man who worked as a high school teacher. He had patience, humor, and plans for the future. But the first time he came to dinner at Mom's, she picked him apart like a hawk dissecting prey. "A teacher's salary won't take you far, Lauren," she said while he was still sitting at the table. He never asked me out again. Others followed the same pattern. If Mom didn't drive them away directly, my own availability, or lack of it, did. When she called, I went. When she needed something, I was there. After a while, men stopped trying to compete with the invisible chain tethering me to my mother. By the time I turned 28, I had settled into a rhythm that looked, from the outside, like stability. I had a respectable job, a small house, and a routine that kept me busy. People in town called me dependable, reliable, caring. Words that felt flattering until I realized they all translated to the same thing: someone who didn't live for herself. Holidays were the worst reminders. Rachel would sweep into town with her husband, Thomas, and their kids, each visit timed down to the minute. Mom would transform into the picture of warmth and hospitality. Criticisms melted away, replaced with doting praise. "Rachel, tell us about your big case. Rachel, your children are so talented." I became a shadow at my own family gatherings, refilling glasses, clearing plates, laughing politely at jokes I wasn't included in. I told myself it was fine. That at least Mom was happy. That maybe, if I kept trying, if I worked a little harder, one day she'd look at me with the same pride she reserved for Rachel. But no matter what I did, the bar kept moving. Approval was always one step out of reach. Looking back, I can see that I was waiting for something to break. That I couldn't have gone on like that forever. At the time, though, I didn't let myself think about escape. Leaving felt impossible. And so I stayed, trapped in Fairview, carrying the weight of a life I never chose. I had no idea then that my mother's 60th birthday, the night I planned to finally win her approval, would become the night I lost everything instead. I spent weeks preparing for my mother's 60th birthday. It was supposed to be perfect. I told myself this time would be different, that if I planned every detail carefully enough, she would finally see me, not Rachel, not some comparison or disappointment, just me. I booked a private dining room at Fairview's most exclusive restaurant, the Willow House. 12 seats, a chandelier glittering above, arrangements of white roses and blue hydrangeas down the center of the table, her favorite colors. I even ordered a cake from the same bakery that had done Rachel's wedding 5 years earlier, because Mom still brought it up whenever she wanted to remind me what real taste looked like. The centerpiece of my plan was a gift I'd been saving for months, a vintage sapphire brooch I'd spotted at an antique store downtown. I remembered her telling a story once, how her mother had a similar piece that was lost during a move. For just a second, her voice had softened when she spoke about it, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. I thought maybe, just maybe, recreating that memory would unlock some corner of affection she'd been keeping locked away. Rachel agreed to come with Thomas. That in itself felt like a victory. I had begged her to show up, convinced Mom would be in better spirits if both daughters were there. "It'll mean a lot to her," I said over the phone, not admitting that it would mean even more to me. The day of the dinner, I got my hair cut and styled, slipped into a navy blue dress I knew Mom would approve of, conservative but elegant, and put on the pearl earrings Dad had given me for my 18th birthday. I practiced my smile in the mirror, promising myself I wouldn't let nerves or Mom's inevitable little jabs ruin the evening. When I arrived to pick her up, she answered the door in her bathrobe. "We have to leave in 15 minutes, I said gently, glancing at my watch. "I can't possibly be ready in 15 minutes, Lauren," she scoffed. "You know I take time with my appearance. Unlike some people." Her eyes flicked down my dress with a familiar curl of disapproval. By the time she was dressed, ironically, in her own navy dress, we were nearly an hour late. I called the restaurant twice to push back the reservation, my stomach twisting with every excuse I made. When we finally arrived, Rachel and Thomas were already there, along with the other guests who had been waiting awkwardly in the bar. Mom laughed and hugged Rachel. "We thought you'd forgotten your own birthday dinner," Rachel teased. "Oh, you know Lauren," Mom replied lightly. "She can't manage her time to save her life." Heat crept up my neck, but I bit my tongue. Tonight wasn't about defending myself. Tonight was about making her happy. The dining room sparkled just the way I'd envisioned. Crystal glasses caught the light, candles glowed, flowers filled the air with their soft perfume. Eleanor, one of Mom's oldest friends, clasped my hand as she took her seat. "You've thought of everything, Lauren. This is beautiful." Mom only gave a noncommittal hum. "The flowers are a bit much, don't you think? Lilies in a dining room overpower the food." I saw Eleanor's eyes soften with sympathy, but I forced a smile. "I thought you liked them." Dinner moved forward, the conversation lively, though I felt like an observer rather than a participant. Rachel told stories about a case in London. Thomas described the private school their children attended. Mom beamed at every word. When I tried to chime in about a campaign I'd led at the agency, Mom cut me off. "Lauren, could you ask the waiter for more water?" My glass is empty. I swallowed hard, nodding, and turned to fetch the waiter. After the main course, the cake was brought out, glowing with candles. I reached for the small wrapped box in my purse, heart thudding. This was the moment, the gift, the gesture, the proof of my devotion. But before I could present it, Harold, one of the guests, called out, "Speech. Diane, you can't turn 60 without sharing a little wisdom." Mom smiled, lifting her glass. "Well, I'm not one for speeches, but I do want to thank you all for being here tonight. Life has given me many blessings. My wonderful daughter Rachel, who makes me proud every day. My successful son-in-law Thomas, and my beautiful grandchildren." She squeezed Rachel's hand, her eyes warm. Then she turned to me. "And Lauren, of course, always present." A ripple of awkward chuckles traveled around the table. I froze, my gift box suddenly heavy in my hand. As I looked toward the future, Mom continued, "I find myself thinking about what would truly make me happy. At 60, you're supposed to simplify your life. Surround yourself with joy, remove what brings you stress." She paused, then fixed her gaze on me, her smile tight. "So if I could have one birthday wish, one perfect gift, it would be this, Lauren, I wish you would finally leave my life and let me have some peace in my remaining years." The room went silent. Forks hovered midair. Water glasses stopped halfway to lips. I felt 12 pairs of eyes dart to me, then quickly away. Rachel's voice broke the silence, soft and uncertain. "Mom," but she didn't finish the sentence. "What?" Mom said defensively, shrugging. "I'm just being honest. Isn't that what everyone says at this age? Speak your truth." She turned back to me. "You've hovered over me for years, Lauren. Always checking in, always in my business. I can't breathe with you 3 blocks away, watching my every move." My throat tightened. My fingers clenched the gift so hard I thought the box might snap. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice barely audible. "I need some air." No one stopped me. Not Rachel, not Thomas, not even Eleanor. I walked out of the glittering dining room, past the other diners in the restaurant, and out into the cold Fairview night. Only when I sat in my car, the brooch resting on the passenger seat, did the tears begin to fall, silent, unstoppable. Years of trying. Years of shrinking myself, bending myself, rearranging my entire life to fit hers. And all she wanted for her birthday was for me to disappear. And for the first time, I thought, maybe I should give her exactly what she asked for. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, the unopened gift box lying in front of me like some cruel joke. The sapphire brooch I'd saved for, the dinner I'd planned, the weeks of effort, all of it had led to that one moment, her words echoing like a bell I couldn't unhear. "The best gift would be if you left my life." Part of me wanted to believe it was a slip, some careless comment fueled by wine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My mother had been saying it in different ways for years. That night, she had simply stripped away the pretense and said it plain. By dawn, my eyes burned from crying, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. If she wanted me gone, maybe it was time I finally gave her what she wanted. Not just a week of distance or a sulky retreat into silence, no, something bigger. Permanent. The idea was terrifying. Where would I go? How would I support myself? Could I really vanish from the only life I'd ever known? Yet the more I thought about it, the more it felt less like running away and more like survival. I made a list on a yellow legal pad. Sell the house. Close accounts. Resign from work. Decide what to take, what to leave. Each bullet point steadied me. This wasn't just an emotional reaction, it was a plan. That morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. My voice sounded strangely calm as I left the voicemail. Then I began the process of untangling myself from the life I had spent a decade stitching together. The hardest part was the money. 2 of my bank accounts were joint with Mom, originally set up after Dad's death to cover household expenses and her medical bills. Over the years, I'd been the one quietly adding money, while she treated them like personal spending accounts. If I simply emptied them, it would look like theft. But if I left them open, she'd have free rein, and all my sacrifices would be erased in weeks. After some frantic research and a consultation with a local attorney I barely knew, I found the answer: a trust. The money would be frozen and placed under management, earmarked for Mom's medical care and home maintenance only. She wouldn't be able to squander it, but she also wouldn't be left destitute. For the first time in my life, I was protecting myself as well as her. Next came the house. I contacted a real estate investor who specialized in quick sales. His offer was insulting compared to what the property was worth, but the promise of closing in a week was worth the loss. I couldn't afford to linger. Resigning from my job was strangely painless. 13 years at the same agency ended with a 2-minute phone call to my boss. Family reasons, I told him. I'll email a letter of resignation. He sounded surprised but not devastated. It hit me then how replaceable I was, even in the place I had poured so much of myself into. Packing was another revelation. At first, I thought I'd need everything: furniture, books, clothes. But the more I sorted, the smaller the take pile became. A few essentials: my laptop, a quilt my grandmother had made, a handful of photographs. The rest could be sold, donated, or abandoned. It was unsettling to realize how little of my life felt essential. A week after the birthday dinner, I drove through Fairview one last time. The tree-lined streets I'd memorized, the park where I used to run, the corner coffee shop where the barista always knew my order. All of it looked smaller, almost two-dimensional, as though it belonged to someone else's life. I slowed in front of Mom's house. The white curtains in the bay window were drawn tight, as always. I didn't stop. There was nothing left to say. That night, I wrote 2 letters. One was for Rachel, to be delivered by the attorney after I was gone. It explained the trust, the financial decisions, and made it clear that Mom's needs would still be met. I didn't include where I was going. I wasn't sure I knew myself. The second letter was shorter. It was for Mom. I slipped the brooch into a padded envelope with a note: "You asked for a different gift, so I'm returning this one. May you find the peace you're looking for." The next morning, I signed the closing documents on my house, accepted a cashier's check, and dropped the envelope into the mailbox at the Fairview post office. Then I pointed my car west, the rising sun in my rearview mirror. As the miles stretched out, I felt something I hadn't expected: calm. The farther I drove, the lighter I became. Fear was still there, of course, coiled tight in my chest. But beneath it was something stronger: resolve. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my mother's approval. I wasn't trying to be the good daughter. I was just leaving. And in that leaving, I could almost feel the shape of someone new beginning to emerge. The first morning on the road, I woke up in a nondescript motel off the interstate in Indiana, the kind with thin curtains that let in too much light and carpet that smelled faintly of bleach. For a moment, disoriented, I thought I was still in Fairview, that maybe the birthday dinner had only been a nightmare. But then I saw the cardboard boxes in the back of my car through the window, and reality settled in. I was really gone. I had no destination, only a direction: west. It felt symbolic, like chasing the horizon, running towards some new version of myself I hadn't yet met. Each state line I crossed felt like shedding another layer of the old life I'd left behind. The first few days blurred together: highways, gas stations, fast food wrappers in the passenger seat. I avoided calling anyone. My old phone sat silent in the glove compartment, turned on but ignored. I told myself I'd keep it for emergencies, but really, it was a lifeline I was afraid to cut completely. Driving through endless flatlands, I had too much time to think. Doubt crept in during the long stretches of cornfields and sky. What if I'd made a mistake? What if Mom was right, that I was hovering, smothering, a burden she was better off without? The voice in my head sounded so much like hers that sometimes I had to remind myself it wasn't the truth, just an echo of years of conditioning. But then there were moments when the doubt broke, and I felt something else, exhilaration. I rolled down the windows, let the wind whip through my hair, and for a few fleeting miles, I felt untouchable. Free. By the fourth day, the scenery shifted. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, then mountains. I avoided big cities, sticking to smaller towns where no one looked twice at a stranger passing through. I paid for most things in cash, careful not to leave a trail. It was paranoid, maybe, but it made me feel safer, like I was constructing a wall between who I had been and who I might become. Crossing into Oregon, I felt something loosen inside me. The landscape changed, dense forests, misty coastlines, roads winding like ribbons between towering pines. It was a world so different from Fairview's neat lawns and church steeples that I could almost believe I'd stepped into someone else's life. On the sixth day, I stumbled onto Seabrook. It wasn't on any map I'd studied, just a name on a green highway sign. My gas tank was low, and I needed a break, so I took the exit. The town was small, perched on the edge of the Pacific like it had grown out of salt and stone. Fishing boats bobbed in the harbor, gulls wheeled overhead, and the air smelled of brine and pine needles. There was one main street, lined with a grocery store, a hardware shop, a handful of cafes, and a real estate office with a "for rent" sign in the window. Something about it stopped me. Maybe it was the way the town felt tucked away, easy to overlook. Maybe it was the fact that it wasn't polished or trying too hard, it was just itself. After years of bending into someone else's idea of who I should be, that felt like a revelation. Inside the real estate office, I found a listing for a furnished cottage overlooking the bay. It was small, a little weathered, with cedar siding gone gray from the sea air. The porch leaned slightly to one side, the windows stuck when humidity was high, but it had a view of the water and, more importantly, privacy. I signed the lease that afternoon under the name Elaine Davis, a combination of my middle name and the street I grew up on. Not clever, not elaborate, but ordinary enough to blend in. That was what I wanted most, ordinariness. To be unremarkable, unnoticed. The first night in the cottage, I sat on the porch as the sun sank into the ocean. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange, the water shifting from silver to black. I listened to the waves, steady and relentless, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something, for approval, for the next criticism, for the next obligation. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I could build a life here, if I could truly leave behind the person I'd been. But as the cool sea air wrapped around me, I felt a fragile, trembling kind of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something. Maybe, in leaving, I was finally finding a way to appear. Settling into Seabrook felt like stepping into a life I hadn't known I was allowed to want. The first week was a blur of practical tasks, setting up utilities, buying groceries, figuring out which cabinet door in the cottage stuck and which floorboard creaked loudest in the night. It was all so ordinary, but the ordinariness itself felt like a luxury. The cottage wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. The siding needed paint, the windows rattled when the wind came in from the bay, and the water heater groaned like an old man every time I showered. But it was mine, or at least mine for as long as the month-to-month lease allowed. After years of living in a house 3 blocks from my mother's, where I never felt entirely off-duty, the quirks of the cottage felt like freedom. Work was another hurdle. I couldn't exactly put Lauren Mitchell, Fairview, Illinois, on applications, not if I wanted to keep the distance I'd worked so hard to create. So I leaned into freelancing. I dusted off old design samples, built a simple website under my new name, Elaine Davis Design, and signed up for a few online platforms. Within days, I had my first project, small, nothing glamorous, but it proved that I could still work, still earn, still survive on my own terms. Each morning, I started walking down to a cafe on Main Street called the Tidal Grounds. It sat in a converted boathouse, with wide windows that looked out over the water. The owner, a woman named Diane, no relation to my mother, though the name made me stiffen at first, was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a messy bun and laugh lines etched deep around her mouth. She noticed me right away. "You're new," she said on my second morning, sliding an Americano across the counter without asking my order. Is it that obvious? I asked, trying for casual. She shrugged. Seabrook's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A new face stands out. But don't worry, we respect privacy around here. Lots of people come to the coast to start over. Her words hit a little too close, but the matter-of-fact way she said them made me believe her. She didn't push for more, and I was grateful. By the fifth morning, she already remembered my order. Americano, no room, she said, sliding the cup toward me with a faint smile. Something about her presence, steady, unintrusive, made me exhale a little easier. The town itself was small but not suffocating. There was a grocery store that smelled faintly of salt and fish, a library that doubled as a community center, a hardware store where the owner gave me unsolicited advice about stormproofing the cottage. Everyone seemed to know one another's names, but no one pressed me for mine beyond Elaine. It was the kind of anonymity that still held warmth. I could be seen without being scrutinized. At night, I'd sit on the porch and watch the bay. Fishing boats came and went, their lights winking in the dusk. Sometimes I'd hear laughter drifting from the pier, or music from the bar down the street. I didn't join in, not yet. It was enough just to sit and listen, to let the sound of other people's lives remind me that the world was bigger than the cage I'd been living in. Still, the past had a way of creeping in. One evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I powered up my old phone. Dozens of missed calls from Rachel. Texts that ranged from, "Are you okay?" to "Mom says you took all the money, please tell me that's not true." There were even voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize, likely neighbors or people from the church. I closed the phone, my chest tight. It was exactly what I'd feared. My mother had already spun her version of the story. I could imagine her voice now, trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Lauren just up and left me. She drained the accounts. I don't know what I'll do." And Fairview, ever eager to rally behind its saints, would believe her. I didn't open the messages again. Not that night. Not the next. Instead, I focused on Seabrook, on the quiet mornings at the tidal grounds, on the gulls circling above the pier, on the simple satisfaction of cooking dinner in a kitchen where no one criticized how much salt I used. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I found a framed photo of me and Dad. I'd been about 10, holding up a drawing with crayons still clutched in my hand. He'd knelt beside me, smiling so wide you could see the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. Mom wasn't in the picture. She'd probably been the one behind the camera, though if I remembered right, she'd made some cutting remark afterward about how childish the drawing was. I set the photo on the windowsill, the bay glimmering in the background. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a relic of a life gone wrong. It felt like a reminder of the part of me I was trying to reclaim, the part that created, the part that believed someone might be proud of me without conditions. Seabrook didn't know me as Lauren Mitchell, the disappointing daughter. Here, I was Elaine Davis, the woman who ordered the same coffee every morning, who rented the crooked little cottage by the water, who was building a life from scratch. And for the first time, that felt like enough. It didn't take long for my mother's voice to find me, even from hundreds of miles away. I wasn't looking for it, honestly, I was doing everything I could to avoid it, but it found me all the same. It started with an email from Rachel. The subject line was simple: "Call me." The message itself was frantic: "Mom is telling everyone you drained the accounts and abandoned her. People are talking. She's devastated. Please call so we can sort this out." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I had expected Mom to be angry, maybe even dramatic. But to accuse me of stealing? Of abandonment? That was more than just anger, it was a full rewrite of the truth. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I logged onto the website of the Fairview Gazette, half dreading what I might find. Sure enough, there it was, a short piece buried in the community section. Local widow left destitute after daughter disappears. The article quoted Mom directly. "Lauren left after a minor disagreement at my birthday dinner. she said, painting herself as the picture of reasonableness. Then I discovered our accounts were empty. I don't know how I'll manage. My hands shook as I clicked out of the article. Empty? The accounts weren't empty. They were protected in a trust, carefully arranged so she would always have what she needed. I had made sure of that. But in her version of the story, I was the villain. The next blow came in the form of a fundraising page. Help Diane Mitchell rebuild. A neighbor had set it up, probably moved by whatever sob story Mom had told. The description made me sick. After being abandoned by her only nearby daughter, Diane is struggling to cover medical bills and basic expenses. There were already hundreds of dollars in donations, with comments like "No one deserves this" and "Praying for you, Diane." I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming fast. Even now, even miles away, she had control. She had taken my disappearance and twisted it into something ugly, a performance where she was the wounded saint and I was the cruel deserter. That night, I walked down to the tidal grounds just to feel less alone. Diane, the cafe owner, was wiping down the counter when I came in. She glanced up at me, then at my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I muttered. She didn't pry, just poured my Americano and slid it across the counter. "Family stuff?" she asked casually, like she already knew. I hesitated, then nodded. "Complicated family stuff." She gave a little hum. "You're not the first to land here with that story. You won't be the last." Then she smiled faintly. "Seabrook has a way of letting people breathe again. Give it time." Her words settled something in me. Not peace exactly, but a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone in this as I felt. Back at the cottage, I opened my laptop again, bracing myself. There were more emails from Rachel now, increasingly urgent. Mom had some kind of episode, she collapsed at church. "Please call me." My first instinct was panic. Guilt surged through me, automatic and overwhelming. Was I killing her by leaving? Had my absence literally broken her? But then, another message came through, this one from Dr. Peterson, our old family doctor. It was short, discreet, but clear: "Your mother's condition is stable." It was a panic attack, not a heart attack. "She is physically fine." I sat back in my chair, the breath I'd been holding rushing out. A panic attack. Not life-threatening. Not my fault. Still, the guilt lingered, heavy and sticky. For so long, I had been programmed to respond instantly to her needs, real or imagined. Now, even with distance, the old reflex tugged at me. I forced myself to think logically. Mom wasn't suffering because she was truly abandoned. Her bills were covered, her house was maintained, her medical needs funded. She was suffering because she couldn't control me anymore. And she was using every tool she had: sympathy, manipulation, public shaming, to pull me back. The realization was both crushing and liberating. Crushing, because it meant my mother's love had always been conditional, transactional. Liberating, because for the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. That night, I made a choice. I wasn't going back. Not for the fundraiser, not for the gossip, not even for Rachel's pleading messages. I couldn't keep living my mother's story. I had to keep writing my own. The fundraiser, the articles, the whispers from Fairview, I could have ignored all of it if not for Rachel. She wouldn't stop writing. Every day, a new email, sometimes 3 or 4. "Mom's bills aren't being paid. People are saying you took everything." She collapsed again. "I don't know how to handle this. Please, Lauren. Please just talk to me." The guilt rose like a tide each time I read her words. My instinct was to defend myself, to prove that I wasn't the monster Mom was painting me to be. But part of me also knew that if I tried to explain, Rachel might not believe me. For years, she had lived in the glow of Mom's praise. She hadn't seen the way the light turned sharp and cold when it landed on me. Still, I couldn't sit by and watch the lie grow bigger. I gathered everything. Every text where Mom had belittled me. Every email where she compared me to Rachel. Every voicemail laced with guilt and scorn. I organized bank statements showing my contributions, medical records showing her real condition, even photos of the brooch she had rejected without ever opening the box. 27 pages in all. A record of a lifetime. I sent them to the attorney I'd hired before leaving, with instructions to deliver the packet to Rachel. If she wanted the truth, here it was. If not, at least I'd finally stopped hiding it. Days passed before I heard back. When Rachel finally wrote, her tone was different. I didn't know. Lauren, I swear I didn't know the extent of it. I thought she was just hard on you. But this is abuse. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I let you carry this alone. I read her message 3 times, hardly believing it. My chest felt tight, not just from the relief of being believed, but from the ache of all the years when she hadn't seen it. When I'd been invisible even to my own sister. Her email ended with something I hadn't expected. I want to rebuild our relationship, independent of Mom. If you're willing, I'll respect whatever boundaries you need. For the first time, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything by leaving. Meanwhile, the trust I'd set up was doing its job. Every attempt Mom made to withdraw large sums was denied without documentation. Utility bills? Paid. Prescriptions? Covered. Cleaning service? Authorized. But the request for thousands of dollars in emergency expenses, with no proof, denied. A transfer of $10,000 to Rachel's account, denied. It was infuriating to her, I'm sure. But for me, it was confirmation that I had done the right thing. I wasn't abandoning her, I was refusing to be exploited any longer. Word of the truth began to spread. The fundraiser was taken down after the organizer learned that Mom's expenses were, in fact, being covered. The gossip slowed. The article faded into the archives. For once, her story wasn't the only one. In Seabrook, I felt lighter. I walked more. I joined a local hiking group. I let myself smile at strangers without worrying what Mom would say about it. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to stitch together a life that belonged only to me. But I also knew this wasn't the end of it. My mother wasn't the kind of person to let go of control easily. I braced myself for whatever would come next, letters, accusations, maybe even apologies that weren't really apologies. Still, I had something I'd never had before, boundaries. And for the first time, I intended to keep them. One evening, sitting on the porch with the ocean stretching out before me, I realized I was no longer afraid of her story. For years, she had defined me, dutiful, disappointing, always lesser than Rachel. But now, I had my own story. And this time, I was the one writing it. Rachel's first real email had felt like a lifeline. For so long, I'd thought she chose not to see. Maybe she had, it was easier to keep her place as the golden child, to look away while I absorbed the blows. But now, faced with the evidence, she couldn't deny it anymore. And to my surprise, she didn't. She believed me. We began exchanging cautious messages. Nothing too heavy at first. She asked about Seabrook, and I told her about the crooked little cottage and the gulls that screamed like angry toddlers at dawn. She laughed, really laughed, and for the first time, it felt like we were sisters talking, not opponents in some unspoken competition. But the past hovered, heavy between us. One evening, she wrote, I feel like I abandoned you. I thought distance was protecting me, but I realize now it left you alone with her. I stared at that line for a long time. It was true. But for the first time, I didn't feel the old bitterness. We were both surviving, I typed back. You played your role, I played mine. We didn't know another way. Her reply came quickly, maybe now we can find one. Meanwhile, my mother's resistance was faltering. The trust required therapy sessions before she could access discretionary funds. At first, she treated it like a performance, telling Rachel and others that she was only humoring me. But something shifted. Maybe it was the lack of an audience to manipulate, maybe it was the simple fact that her usual tactics no longer worked. Rachel reported small changes. She apologized to me last week, she wrote in one message, sounding almost stunned. For trying to rearrange my schedule. She actually said, I was being unfair. I've never heard her say that in my life. It wasn't transformation, not yet. But it was a crack in the armor. A sliver of light where before there had only been shadow. Then came the letter. Handwritten, delivered through my attorney. I unfolded it at my kitchen table, my heart pounding. I am sorry you felt hurt by my words, it began. My jaw clenched. The classic non-apology. But as I read on, there were other lines. I never intended for you to take such drastic action. If I was hard on you, it was because I wanted the best. I am attending sessions, though I think it's ridiculous at my age. I hope this proves how much I want to fix what has come between us. I laughed bitterly. It was so her, taking credit even as she pretended to bend. I showed the letter to Dr. Morgan, the therapist I had started seeing in Seabrook. She nodded knowingly. This is typical. She's trying to regain control by appearing reasonable. But notice, there's no real accountability, no acknowledgement of harm. Just you overreacting, her accommodating. The clarity helped. For years, letters like that would have pulled me back, made me question myself. Now, I could see them for what they were, manipulation wrapped in polite words. I wrote a brief reply, factual and distant. I acknowledge your letter. I'm glad you're attending sessions. I am focusing on my own healing and not ready for direct communication. The trust will continue as established. No apologies. No hooks. Just boundaries. And in Seabrook, life was quietly blossoming. My freelance work grew, small businesses from nearby towns began finding me through word of mouth. I joined a hiking group and discovered trails that wound through mossy forests to hidden coves. At the tidal grounds, Diane and I fell into a comfortable rhythm, morning coffee, a shared joke, the kind of easy companionship I'd never had with my mother. One evening, after a long hike, I stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the wind whipping my hair into my face. For the first time in my life, I felt both small and strong. Small compared to the vastness of the ocean, strong because I had chosen to stand here at all. I thought of my mother then, of her house in Fairview, her carefully curated image, her endless demands. And I realized something that startled me. I didn't hate her. I didn't even wish her ill. I just didn't want to live in her shadow anymore. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about saving myself. That night, I wrote in my journal, boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. I get to choose who I let in, when, and how far. For the first time, I believed it. A year. That's how long it had been since my mother's birthday dinner. Since her words carved through me like glass, I wish you'd leave my life. And I had. Seabrook had become home in ways I couldn't have imagined. The crooked little cottage was no longer just a rental by the bay, it was my refuge, the place where I discovered what it felt like to live without holding my breath. I learned the rhythms of the tide, the way the fog rolled in heavy some mornings, the sound of gulls bickering on the pier like an old married couple. Work was steady. My freelance design business had grown from a handful of projects into a full roster of clients, cafes, boutiques, even a small tourist board that wanted new brochures. For once, my work wasn't just something to do while caring for someone else. It was mine, chosen and nurtured on my own terms. More surprising than the work, though, were the friendships. Diane from the tidal grounds became something like an anchor, never nosy, but always there with a coffee and a smile. I joined a local book club, where I found myself laughing with people who knew me only as Elaine Davis, not as Lauren Mitchell, the disappointing daughter. They didn't measure me against Rachel. They didn't ask about my mother. They just saw me. Rachel and I spoke regularly now, cautiously but with growing warmth. She apologized often, too often, maybe, but I could tell she meant it. Sometimes we talked about Mom, sometimes we didn't. It wasn't about her anymore, it was about us. About rebuilding a sisterhood that had been buried under years of favoritism and silence. As for Mom, there were more letters. Some sharp, some softened, some so out of character I wondered if therapy was beginning to reach her after all. One arrived 3 weeks ago that I keep tucked in a drawer, not because I fully believe it, but because it was the first time she wrote words I'd never expected to see. I was wrong. I hurt you. I'm sorry. It wasn't a cure. The years of damage didn't vanish with one sentence. But I read it without tears, without anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Maybe, in her own way, she was beginning to see the truth too. One evening, I walked down to the beach at sunset. The sky was streaked with gold and rose, the waves glowing like molten metal as they crashed against the rocks. I stood barefoot at the edge of the water, the Pacific tugging at my ankles, cold and insistent. I thought about the girl I had been in Fairview, the one who hovered outside her mother's approval like a moth burning itself against a lamp. The girl who believed love had to be earned, who thought disappearing would mean she had failed. But standing there, the waves rushing in and out, I realized something. Disappearing hadn't been failure. It had been the first step toward appearing, toward becoming visible to myself. For so long, I'd been trying to live in someone else's story. Now, for the first time, I was writing my own. I whispered it out loud, just to test the sound of it against the wind. I'm here. I'm enough. The words didn't solve everything. They didn't erase the past or guarantee the future. But they were true. And they were mine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I turned back toward the cottage, the lights of Seabrook twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow would bring more work, more coffee at the tidal grounds, maybe another letter from Mom, maybe another call from Rachel. But tonight, I was simply me. Not the good daughter. Not the disappointment. Just Lauren, no, just Elaine, standing at the edge of the world, finally appearing.